Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another Supatease video. And there's a massive sweep of PvP changes coming in today, and I'm going to need to update my solo shuffle PvP tier list in accordance with those changes coming through. And if you missed those changes specifically, you can check them out in the video that I will have linked at the end of this one. But this is going to give you a good idea of where the power and potency and likelihood of success in climbing the solo shuffle ladder is going to come from all of the available specializations. So let's get started. We got a lot to talk about. Now, Affliction Warlock is receiving monstrous amounts of damage buffs to pretty much every single one of its abilities. It's still going to be lacking possibly finishing power, but there are a lot of other classes in the game that are getting changes to their executes, like kill shot damage buffs, execute damage buffs. Ellie Shamans are getting reworked to be more lethal. So the fact that you have a high amount of sustained damage is going to synergize really well with these classes that have high execute power. There's going to be a lot more of them, so you're likely going to start to see a lot more success. I am a bit hesitant to put it onto S tier at this current time. I feel like the Warlock specs are all pretty reasonably competitive with each other, and I don't think that Affliction is going to stand out any different than the rest of them to really be deserving of the S tier position. I also think that you can get some lobbies that are still going to be frustrating, things like Windwalker Monks, things like Demon Hunter, which are receiving a lot of buffs, which are likely going to hold this down from being an S tier powerhouse, but you're probably going to have a way better time on this patch than previous. Arcane Mage. Now, this specialization not receiving any changes, but your natural born enemy, the Marksmanship Hunter, is getting a remarkable amount of buffs, and so is all the other Hunter specs. So Arcane is probably going to be a tough spot. Warlocks are getting buffs, Hunters are getting buffs, Ellies are getting buffs, and these are all classes that are really difficult to deal with as Arcane. So my expectation for Arcane is that it's going to suffer a bit. It's probably going to fall down a couple ranks. And I didn't finish my 2400 challenge on it. I'm still going for that. I think I'm at 2280 now. I'm going to try and go for it here today. And I'm thinking it's going to be a lot harder today than it was yesterday. Even fighting Hunters, before this patch was difficult. And Ellie's before this patch. And I think it's going to be a lot more difficult. So Arcane, I think, is going down a bit. Also, these classes have a huge amount of interrupts. That's the natural enemy of the Arcane Mage. Arms Warrior. This is one where they snuck in a couple of buffs at the last second. I think they added in deep wounds buff of like 28% and an execute damage buff of about 15%, possibly a little bit more mortal strike damage in the last second, and everyone was freaking out thinking like Arms Warrior is going to be just this powerhouse, this monster, this insane class. One of the reasons I think Arms Warrior could do well is that likely the Shadow Priest population is still pretty high. With this deep wounds change, you're going to be able to do damage to high armor targets more frequently, so things like Balance Druid you're probably going to be able to cut down a little bit more frequently, which is going to still probably be popular. So with the ability to cut through armor, they are nerfing your burst damage, though. I think they're bringing down the strength of Avatar and Warbreaker, and typically sustained damage is not that great. They're also nerfing your fatal mark, so you're probably going to want to shift your talents around a little bit, or give it a go and see if it's still really good. But I'm imagining there might be some other options in terms of talents to you. People think this is going to be like a god class. I can't see it. I think that if you get lobbies with mages, you're still going to have a really tough time. Would be my expectation. Now, I mean, mages, I guess, are weaker. Hunters probably going to be more popular. I think it's probably going to be A tier. I think that you can still kite the specialization. This one, maybe this one comes back to bite me in terms of building this tier list, ends up being on S tier. It's definitely somewhere between A and S, but it's way better than it was before, which was like low B maybe, or a high C. But it's definitely going to be way better. I'm a little bit hesitant to put it up all the way because, again, I think it still has some counters, and that's what's keeping you from getting into the S tier status. Assassination Rogue, you're gonna get 5% damage buff, 5% auto attack damage buff. I can't see that making you insanely viable. I think that you're still the worst rogue spec. Assassination, while you are still a rogue, kidney shot is still going to be pretty deadly. You still have blind. You're the squishiest of all the rogue specs. Your damage, I think, is honestly the lowest, which was the one thing that was supposed to be your main thing as a spec, even with 5% buff. Assassination is probably still not going to be superb. Balance Druid, my expectation is this is still probably going to be S tier. I think Cyclone is a really powerful tool. Root Solar Beam is also a really powerful tool. You've got a lot of utility that lets you flex in tons of different situations. Your survivability is good. In the hands of a player who knows how to kite and shift into bear and find those timings and peel for the team, you're going to have absolute control of the game. So I think Balance Druid is likely still going to be S tier. Beast Mastery Hunter, I think the only change was a kill shot damage buff. Now, it's a pretty significant one, I think. I think it's like 10% or something like that. And the numbers are correct, if I'm correct on that 100%. So It's probably going to run down a lot of these mages. It's probably going to have a decent time into some of the Warlock specs like Affliction. It doesn't really synergize, though, with a lot of things in the game, especially with Solo Shuffle, which I think is one of its main problems. I've always given it like a really high ranking, even though we don't really see a lot of it. I still think it's probably A tier in Solo Shuffle. I think just the amount of damage you do, you can win pretty much with just damage. And now with the execute against a lot of these clothies, you're really good into dot classes because you can feign off their dots. So if Warlocks are more popular, Ellies are more popular, I think you'll be good in that regard. I think it's probably fair to say it's probably going to land somewhere on A. Blood Death Knight, I mean, it's probably one of the better tank specs, but I would not suggest trying to do a tank in Solo Shuffle if you're trying to go after Transmogs or the Legend title. The only thing you could do with the tank spec is cheese a rank 1 title because their cutoffs are really low, although even getting to those cutoffs can be really difficult. Brewmaster, same type of deal. Demonology Warlock. Now, this is getting a few buffs on spells that aren't like the most impactful. I think it was like Hanagaden and Dreadstalkers, but it was already, arguably, debatably close to the best Warlock spec. It's probably still going to be really powerful. I kind of want to slot it up here onto S tier. I think with Stun and Coil, you're going to be getting run down by Warriors, though. Do you have the right tools to be able to deal with all the Warriors now, like Fury Warrior, which is going to be really scary? Maybe A tier. I feel like all the Loxer specs are pretty close to each other. We'll put these from like best to worst. What I think on the tier from left to right. Ranged and melee you should keep separate from each other, obviously. Destruction Warlock, getting a pretty fat Chaos Bolt buff. Still going to be pretty fragile to things like Fury Warrior, and I'm really expecting Fury Warrior to be kind of like pumping out some big numbers. Now, Chaos Bolt could probably be getting critting about like 150k, I'm thinking. Maybe 160 or 70 if you're getting, high end of that. Do I feel like Destro is a B or an A? That's what I'm really debating right now. You have lots of schools of magic to deal with interrupts, which is way better than Arcane. I think that alone is going to put you a tier above Arcane with this patch. You are a bit tankier as well. The ability to just complete portal out of line of sight, gateway to kite. It's probably an A tier, but I think it's probably worse than Demonology, even with the Chaos Ball buffs. But I think it's going to be still a bit more of a monster spec. Devastation Evoker, you're still just a cheese spec. You run in, you one shot with your deep breath, and if you don't, you're AFK. I'm putting it in on C. I don't think it's a great spec. It's a coin flip. You're just gambling every lobby, hoping that you get good crits, and if you don't, you're not really going to succeed. Its kit's not fully fleshed out for PvP. I'm putting it down here a little bit lower. Discipline Priest, they're nerfing the shield build, but they're buffing your baseline shields. They're nerfing the talents, but buffing your baseline shields. So other builds of Disc is probably going to feel better. I don't think it's going to be super fantastic. It's already probably the worst healer. So it's like at best like mid. Probably going to feel pretty mid after the changes. And it sucks into Warlocks, and it sucks into Ellies. So I don't see it being like much more than mid here in this patch. Ellie Shaman, now this guy's probably S tier. I mean, Ellie Shaman is like one of the most represented specs in Solo Shuffle, and I think adding lethality to its damage is going to make it even better. I think it's going to be even better, and it synergizes with Warriors, Warlocks, Moonkins. It synergizes with like everything in the game. You can't deny that Ellie Shaman is like a really phenomenal Solo Shuffle specialization. Now, you can get run down, but even in those situations, if you're playing kiting builds and just looking to avoid damage, I think you can still deal with it. Enhancement Shaman is probably falling down from where it was previously. They're nerfing the Doomwinds build heavily. You're likely going back to Lava Lash, and I think if you go back to Lava Lash, you're probably going to feel pretty mid. But the burst was ridiculous, so I think it was obviously needed a nerf, but I think it's probably going to be falling down a little bit. You're going to have decent healing into a lot of these kind of dot classes and sustain classes, and you do synergize with Warriors. So if there's a lot of Warriors and you're queuing up into a lot of Warrior lobbies, you could have a good time in that regard. But I think it's going to be a little bit weaker than it was previously, just slightly. Feral Druid, you're not getting any changes. But I think you're still kind of a sleeper class. I think that you do some of the highest damage in the game with the Cyclone build, resetting your Feral Frenzy on your next Mage and Ferocious Bite. I think, do I want to put this on B or A? I feel like Feral is actually like really sleeper good. I'm gonna put it on A. It's obviously, I think it's worse than Arms Warrior, but I think that it's still a really powerful specialization. Fire Mage, now this guy, you suffered with Hunters, you suffer with Ellies, same as Arcane, but you have multiple schools of magic. Only difficulty is I think you're a little squishier, you're easier to connect to than Arcane. That would be like a trade-off downside to being able to do your damage more readily than Arcane and not have to deal with interrupts as much. but that you'll die faster. So I'm struggling to stuff this somewhere between A and B. I think Frost Mage probably ends up being better than Fire overall with how many melee are getting buffed. So maybe slotting this into B, a little bit weaker than before. Frost Mage, again, I think this is probably going to be A, given how many warriors there are going to be, and Frost Mage is like number one. I mean, Arcane is also, I would say, number one into warrior, but I'm worried about hunters. I guess you're worried about hunters with Frost as well. Frost has the advantage of double school like Fire and the avoidance of Arcane. I think it's going to make it a little bit better, a little bit easier to climb in solo shuffle than those options here after all the changes to Warlocks and Hunters specifically. Frost Death Knight, they're rearranging your class a little bit, but I think you're probably still going to feel a little bit below mid. I don't think it's going to hit the sweet spot, and mostly because they nerfed the Necrotic Aura. You're not really going to synergize with casters as much anymore, and in solo shuffle you get anything, right? You can't guarantee you're playing melee cleaves. So I think Frost is probably not going to still feel remarkable. Now Fury Warrior, on the other hand, I'm doing this, and this might come back to bite me, but I think with the MS build that you have and how much damage they're buffing to all of your abilities, like you're going to be critting probably like 150k on most of your spells. You got to get good uptime, good healing. The MS effect synergizes with pretty much anything in the game, ignoring the fact that it doesn't stack still with other MSs, or doesn't supersede them while you're stacking it, I should say. I think Fury Warrior is going to be a monster. Absolute monster. Guardian Druid, we're just throwing this down here. Again, if you want like cosmetics and stuff, it's going to be really tough to climb with this, but if you want to try and cheese a rank 1, you can use a tank spec for sure. Havoc Demon Hunter, this is a guy that people are saying it's going to be S tier, it's going to be A tier. I think the problem with Havoc, unlike Fury, is that you can die in stuns very easy, and Fury doesn't, because you can use Enrage Regen in stuns, you can pre-destance stuns, you can kind of prepare for stun locks, and be a bit tankier in those stun lock situations than Havoc is. Now you bring way more crowd control than Fury Warrior does for sure. It's going to probably be comparable damage, comparable mobility. You run Warlocks down, and if Warlocks are popular, that's going to be an advantage to you, but so does Fury. Same thing with Ellie. Are we throwing this up on S, or are we throwing this up on A? If I throw this on A, I'm comparing you directly with Feral Druid. Is that a fair comparison? Or should I drop Feral Druid? Or do we put a Demon Hunter on S? Now, some people I feel like are debating how strong it's going to be, because I think you're still going to die to Windwalkers. I think you're still going to die to Subtlety Rogues. And Windwalker's probably still going to be really popular, I would expect. It's maybe going to be the most popular melee spec. I feel like probably the A tier, the best of the A tier, maybe, or close to the best of the A tier for Demon Hunter. Again, the damage is getting rearranged a little bit. It's not just only buffs. They're lowering the damage of I-Beam to make it uninterruptible. So there's going to be a bit of a trade-off with that, but you're going to get your guaranteed I-Beams off unless they get stunned on them, but it's easier to play around stuns than stuns and interrupts. So you're going to get more guaranteed damage. Holy Priest. Now, Holy Priest does phenomenally well into dot classes, especially Affliction if it's more popular, or Ellie with Spam Dispel, Double Fade, Double Dispel, this type of deal. Angel Form, Mass Dispel. It can deal with these classes really effectively. Bringing a ranged stun as a healer is also a great tool. To me, Holy Priest is probably about an A tier healer. It's just really well-rounded, good output, has good offense. You know, you really got pretty much everything you could ask for. You're probably going to run out of mana, though, faster than something like a Holy Paladin, which is going to be S tier. Holy Paladin is a monster into the classes like a buffed, absolute monster into Warlocks, into Ellies, sustains forever, insane mana regeneration. You're losing a little bit of damage, 10% damage off some pad damage, doesn't matter because it's compensated by how much damage all these classes are going to be doing. I think Holy Paladin is still going to be the god tier healer that it is at the moment. Marksmanship Hunter. Now, you might be thinking, like, I've been talking a lot about Hunter, and it's like, it's going to be so amazing. The thing is, they buff spells that are physical damage that don't do damage to plate targets. Now, you are going to run cloth these over. I think, without a doubt, you are going to annihilate mages. Anytime you see a mage, they're gonzo, man. Rapid fire buffs, they were massive in that regard. But rapid fire does little ding-ding damage to an arms warrior or fury warrior. It's not going to be felt as much there. So I don't really think that it's going to be A tier. I think it's probably going to be B tier. You're going to counter the things you already countered harder, but you're probably still going to struggle with the things that were difficult. And there's going to be a lot of plate boys. Even Ellie and Boomkin are pretty tanky. So still probably going to be lobby dependent, but you'll either feel like a god or not. And you can still play the plate lobbies out probably better than something like a Devastation Evoker in terms of coin flipping. I think it's going to be a little bit better than that. So B tier feels about right for that. Mistweaver Monk. Now, I mean, Fist Weaving isn't completely dead, and I honestly think Fist Weaving and Solo Shuffle is still really good, and especially if you're fighting a lot of dot classes, Ailey's Moonkins, Warlocks, Shadow Priests, this type of deal. I think that Fist Weaver is really strong, and even Caster Mistweaver is probably going to be really strong in Solo Shuffle. I'm not putting it up onto S tier. I think there are situations that can be difficult as Mistweaver, high crowd control lobbies, a lot of interrupt lobbies, ranged interrupt lobbies can be difficult for Mistweaver, but I think that's still a pretty well-rounded kit, especially to deal with the current meta. You've got Disarm for these melee classes as well that no other healer brings to the table, so definitely a strong option. Now, Outlaw Rogue. Outlaw Rogue is a little bit difficult to place because I think it's gear dependent, and the gear that you're trying to get is from PvE. So you've got to get the weapon proc. I think it's an embellishment from Mythic Plus that you need to rank up that procs like physical damage on attack. Once you have that, Outlaw Rogue is actually really strong, but you've got to get that first. Do I think it's an A tier or an S tier? I don't think it's an S tier. It's really tough to put a spec on S tier that just nobody's playing. Like, I never see it. And it's not like it does insanely well when I do see it, right? Like, it's not going 6-0 every time that I see it. I think that's probably a sleeper A tier and possibly an S tier if more people got into it, because it's doing a lot more damage now than it was before, but you might still struggle. You're going to bring a lot of disruption though to these melee DPS. You get guaranteed uptime in a lot of these range classes, which is a really big plus for the spec. Preservation Evoker. Do I think this is S tier or A tier? This is a tough one. Because I think that you're going to struggle a little bit if there's a lot of like caster comps that could swap to you in Solo Shuffle. I think that's your main weakness from your short range. So if there's a lot more casters, a lot more swaps to you, it could be difficult. But you do the highest damage of any healer and your output is ridiculous. I feel like it's unfair to not put this on S tier. I think that it's slightly better than Mistweaver and Holy Priest. And honestly, it's like the best healer in a Holy Paladin because you bring crowd control that you can harass the Holy Paladin and end the game with and get on top of them. And Fire Breath Purge is really powerful. I think it's probably fair to say it's S tier. Prot Warrior is probably C tier. I think Prot Warrior is one of the better tank specs that play as a DPS role. You know, Prot Paladin's a healer, but Prot Warrior is actually probably really sleeper. I think you could probably do a lot with this. And again, I'm only comparing against the other tanks. Don't compare it against these. It's like completely different roles. You should only compare range against range and melee against melee and tank against tank. Prot Paladin, again, in Solo Shuffle, it's going to be really tough to climb because your queue times are really long and you only queue into each other. So I'm not really going to rank this because you don't queue into anything else. You only queue in other Prot Paladins. But I think it's tough to climb because your queue times are so long. Resto Shaman, I feel like Resto Shaman is not going to do too well, but if it was complete wizard meta, I could see it doing well, but I think these warriors are going to, and Death Knights are still prevalent. Is it about the same as a Disc Priest? I kind of want to put it on the same tier as Disc, maybe a little better than Disc. I think you struggle with Fist Weavers. In melee lobbies, you're going to struggle with Holy Paladins. Preservation Evoker, you're probably going to maybe have the best time because you can deal with their Sleepwalk the most effectively of any healer. It's probably going to feel mid. I think it's likely going to feel mid. It's going to be really tough to keep up with the pace of the damage that the buffs came through with these other classes. I think is going to be what you notice with Resto Shaman. Resto Druid, I'm throwing this one down here in C tier. I think it's probably the worst healer now after the buffs to Disc Priest. You're completely reliant on your teammates. You just sit in the back with full mastery gear, keeping hots up and hoping that they do more damage and win the game for you. You can try some kitty stuff with Rake Stun, Maim Stun, and Clone, but if you get caught, you're going to die. And you're going to struggle with these dot classes. You're probably going to struggle with the pressure. I think Resto Druid is probably the worst healer moving forward with these hot fixes. Ret Paladin, do I do this? Do I upset the chat? Dude, Ret Paladin is the most represented at highest rating of any spec in Solo Shuffle. And I think it's an absolute monster. The only thing is, like, it's not the best class to be in a wizard lobby compared to other, like, I think Fear Warrior is probably better. That's the only thing, but it's probably the best A tier. I'm going to throw it in as the best A tier melee DPS. I think that this guy is really good, and a lot of you guys that talk about Ret being bad now after the nerfs to it you're just, there's no way. Ret is still remarkably strong. Shadow Priest. Now you're going to have a tough time this patch. Fury Warrior buff, Arms Warrior buff, Windwalker buff. These guys eat you. They munch you. Even the Hunters too. The Hunters as well might be doing enough damage to be munching you. So I'm taking you down from S tier. I'm probably putting you on A tier. You're probably the best A tier, and pretty close to getting into S tier. But I think these physical damage dealing classes are gonna have a tougher time into Ellie and Moonkin than into you being a cloth target now. Subtlety Rogue, I think in the hands of an insane player, it's still probably, you know, A or S. I'm trying to think, like, it with the augmentation nerfs, even you were still good with augmentation. I'm throwing this up here, dude. I'm saying subtlety is S tier in solo shuffle. I think if you're an insane player, this is not a beginner spec. If you're a beginner spec, beginner player, you're not going to do well with this. But if you're advanced and you've put the time into it, I think it's got some of the highest potential for being able to carry lobbies, smoke bomb, shadowy duel, the amount of crowd control that it has itself. It can just carry a game in the hands of a skilled player. So I'm throwing it up onto S tier. Survival Hunter, you're probably better than you were before. I still see a lot of this spec actually, and I think it's probably better than MM. Maybe not like super, probably a little better than Feral, maybe comparable to Feral, lower than Arms. I think you're going to be doing decent damage. Survivability becomes the main issue for it. I think you're squishier of most of these melee DPS. That kind of stops you from getting to S for right now. Unholy DK. Now, you're going to do pretty good into these casters, but they nerfed your synergy with them with the Necrotic Aura nerf. If you want to try a different honor talent, might be worth trying. But you're going to struggle with things like Fury Warrior and Ret Paladins and Arms Warriors, and I'm a bit worried about that. So I'm kind of dropping you down from S to A. You're maybe you're better than Ret. So maybe I shouldn't have said Ret as the top of A until I finished all the specs. I think you're gonna have a tough time with Fury Warriors. I think you're gonna have a tough time with the Arms Warriors now. Those are gonna cut you down, put you in place from where you were before. Vengeance Demon Hunter, we're kind of leaving this unranked. Windwalker Monk, you're probably the best melee. Just hands down, I think you're the best melee. The highest survivability, highest mobility, highest guaranteed ability to end the game. Most represented already. I think you're probably the best melee DPS in the game. Augmentation Evoker, this guy is the final one. This is the guy that received a lot of changes, a lot of nerfs to his healing. For some reason, I still think it's going to be good. I legitimately, it's going to be better than Devastation if you're playing a DPS spec of Evoker, I think. Where do we want to put this? Maybe we put this in B. I think it's probably still going to be good, even with the healing nerfs. But you can see there's a lot of mix-up. There's a lot of specs climbing up a lot of ranks right now. A lot of things holding these guys back are the limitations of their design. I think Marksmanship Hunter probably needs something to get 2 disengages. Its mobility is just not there to keep up with the modern-day range classes like Arcane or Fire. But Arcane or Fire, I think, are going to struggle a lot with these Hunters and a lot with the Ellie. I think Ellie and Hunters are going to be really tough for these guys. Frost Mage is going to be king in these melee cleave lobbies, and for some reason right now, at least in NA, there's way more melee DPS in solo shuffle. So I think it's going to be a little bit better to be a Frost Mage in those instances. But a lot of classes are ranking up. It's a complete shift. We're going to see some, really spicy stuff coming in on the patch. And I hope this video's got you up to date and got your brain working in terms of what you want to be trying when the servers come up. Other than that, thank you very much for watching the video. If you liked it, smash the subscribe button, comment down below with your thoughts, and I will see you in the next video.